Hi, this is Filip Davidov and this video is about gessoing. Gesso is an Italian term for gypsum, which was used in ancient and medieval times as the best surface for painting. We do not apply gesso directly on wood because with change of humidity the wood is unstable. So to resolve this problem I cannot go first for centuries used to glue some fabric on top of the wood. On top of the fabric we'll apply several layers of gesso, flatten and level them for painting at the end. To glue the fabric to the board, it is necessary to scratch the board surface with a tough wire brush. Scratch with pressure evenly and thoroughly, moving the wire brush in different directions. It will allow the glue to penetrate better. To glue the fabric to the wood and to prepare the gesso, we use rabbit skin glue. We usually make what we call 10% glue, but actually the proportion is this. For 1 liter of water, we take 100 grams of glue. It's okay and even recommended to make the glue weaker than that, something like 80 or even 60 grams of glue for 1 liter of water. This time we'll make what we call 10%. To make things easier. For 1 square meter of an icon board, we would normally take 3 liters of glue, but this is an approximate proportion. The fastest way to let the glue melt is to slowly pour it into almost boiling water, stirring the water for more homogeneous distribution and more efficient dissolving. It's okay to start right after boiling the water, but always remember the glue should not boil, otherwise it will lose its gluing ability. When the 10% glue is ready, to prepare the board, you'll need to dilute some of it with hot water. Make it as weak as 4% glue. And with a wide bristle brush, apply a layer of this diluted glue directly on the board. This action fills the gaps between wooden fibers. Usually, it takes about 300 milliliters for 1 square meter. When you finish this job, pour the rest of diluted glue back into the main pot. Usually, it doesn't change much the overall proportions. After drying this first layer of diluted glue on the board, take clean cotton or linen fabric and cut it to the size of the board, leaving an extra inch or half an inch on the edges. Plunge the fabric into the glue and let it sink well. Apply a layer of glue on the board using a large bristle brush, and make sure the glue is distributed thoroughly. Immediately after this, pull the fabric out of the pot, wring it out slightly, and apply it to the surface of the board. The goal is to stretch and spread the fabric evenly, rubbing and squeezing all the bubbles, so it takes a while. If you have rubbed and flattened it enough and the glue is still very liquid, let the board rest for 2 or 3 minutes. When the glue cools down and starts drying up, getting real sticky, cut the corners of the board with a knife to avoid the fabric rising because of shrinking. Since the knife may disturb the surface, it may be necessary to flatten the surface with your hands, remembering to squeeze out all the bubbles. After cutting the angles, apply one more layer of glue with a brush immediately, usually without rubbing it or rubbing just a little. Leave it to dry properly for at least some hours. When it dries up completely, cut extra fabric off the edges, and if you have any bubbles on the dried up fabric, cut them in cross form, so when you apply the next layer, they let the air out and stick well to the surface. Now we'll prepare the gesso. To prepare the gesso, pour half of remaining glue into a different pot. Add a little bit of chalk to it. Then stir and sift the mixture. Let's call this first mixture whitewash. The other half of the glue is used to prepare a thicker gesso. Start by adding a lot of chalk to the pot with the glue. The goal is to achieve a consistency of cream or very liquid yogurt. When the thicker gesso is mixed and sifted, sifting helps to homogenize it. Add boiled linseed oil, about 6 tablespoons per liter. Stir until all ingredients are blended. Keep this pot refrigerated so the thick gesso does not go bad for at least 5 days. First apply the whitewash containing less chalk and most glue. Gesso is always applied with a brush, and then every layer needs to be rubbed and spread evenly over the surface with both hands. Please be very meticulous with the corners and angles, because if you leave little gesso puddles, it will produce bubbles, and they are very hard to take off. When the first layer of gesso on the board dries up, heat the whitewash, the first pot, and add some of the thicker gesso to it. It's about 1/3 of whitewash gesso volume. Apply the second layer on the board the same way as the first. When it dries, apply several more layers, always adding more and more thicker gesso to the first pot. At the end, all the thicker gesso gets added to the first pot. It becomes one substance. The idea is to make every layer weaker than the previous one, so we do it gradually, increasing amount of chalk in the gesso. Having applied 4 or 5 layers, be careful rubbing it with your hands. When you feel it starts getting sticky and thick, take some of gesso from the middle part of the board right with your fingers and apply it to the borders and inner edges, because usually it's there where you have thinnest layers, as they are rubbed off. If gesso starts having some lossy pieces of dried up film and particles in it, sift it to keep it clean. Remember to let each layer dry very well. The number of layers depends on their thickness. Normally we apply 5, 6 or even more. The goal is to cover the fabric texture and add 1 to 2 millimeters on top of it, because you may need to sand some of it off at the end. When you feel that you have applied enough layers to cover the fabric and you just need a little more gesso on top, start using the spatula to level the surface. Spatula helps to flatten the surface and save lots of sanding time. We usually do this on 2 last layers. Applying a regular layer of gesso, as always, rub it with your hands, and when it starts getting really sticky, take a spatula and start leveling and scraping the surface, holding it at 45-degree angle. It helps to level what's been applied in previous layers and scratch off excessive gesso of the latest layer. If you feel the gesso dries up too quickly, you may consider doing a part at a time. Apply gesso just on a little part of the border. Rub with your hands till it gets sticky and finalize. If you feel you can do more, cover a larger surface and check how much you can do before the gesso dries. You do not need to make your surface perfect at once. It's good to start in one layer, let it dry, and repeat it as long as it takes, finalizing all the corners and all the parts of the surface, applying 1 or more layers and leveling them. Gessoing usually takes several days, but one of the most dangerous things is a drought, because it may cause cracks at the very end of the work. If it happens and you are sure that the cracks appeared because of the drought, cut out the piece of gesso down to the board where you see the crack. Repeat applying layer after layer on this little area with patience, then everything will be okay. Choosing the chalk. Some professional iconographers like discussing the best chalk options, but it only makes difference for water gilding. We normally purchase chalk in our nearest hardware store, and we haven't had any problems with it. When you feel you can't do any better with spatula, take moist sponge and clean as many scratches and uneven areas as possible right away. It's great to look at your gessoed surface against the light. Remember though, there is no need to make your icon surface look like a perfect mirror. None of old icons is 100% flat. I think it is because they do not hide the fact that they are handmade, so they look alive. When gesso is dried up, we usually sand the edges of our boards with sanding machines and central part of the icon by hand, using sandpaper number 240 for painting and 400 or higher for gilding, getting rid of scratches and unevenness. Most effective is to take little pieces of sandpaper, like 2 inches for 2 inches, and throw them away when they're filled up with chalk powder. This gessoing manual was composed and published to help our students who want to produce and apply their own gesso. If any part of this video is unclear for you, please email us your questions and comments.